customer just starts crying, right? Like he's like, this is exactly what I mean, this is over like a couple months span too. Like, so he didn't even know that this is going to be able to go through. And like, just seeing his face like made the day worth it because getting home was a whole nother story.
Join us as we dive into the wild world of government auctions and take you behind the scenes to uncover the cool and unique ways bidders from across America are utilizing the items they've won on Municibid, like an ambulance repurposed into a work truck to a city bus converted into an RV, and so much more. Welcome to the Municibid Podcast. This week on the Municibid Podcast, I'm happy to be joined by Justin McMinn of Mobility of Denver. I had the pleasure of meeting with Justin and his colleague Leo at their dealership just 20 minutes or so outside the Denver airport a few weeks ago. It was really interesting to learn a little bit more about the mobility space and how it differs from your traditional dealerships. So welcome to the Municibid Podcast, Justin. It's great to have you. Why don't we start off by letting you introduce yourself?
Sure, that'd be great. So my name is Justin McMinn. I'm currently the general manager of Mobility of Denver. This is a company that my two good friends and I started all the way back in 2014. We actually started out as a company called Colorado Fleet and Mobility. We thought maybe we should encompass all the keyword terms in our company name.
So tell me a bit more about what prompted you to start Mobility of Denver.
We knew that we wanted to have an automotive dealership brokerage that specialized in fleet vehicles because my other partner, Leo, that's really what his start into the whole professional working world after we all graduated college was in. He actually runs a company called Mile High Ambulance, and he still does to this day, in addition to our company here. And he just knew a lot about ambulance vehicles and emergency responder trucks and vans. That's kind of what gave us the first idea. And so we started in 2014 in August. The three of us sat down, and we had previously, flipped cars and done different odd jobs in the automotive industry. I was actually working at a dealership at the time, a big automotive group called Groove Automotive. And they were good to me over many years. And it was one of the first or second professional jobs I had right out of college.
And what did you do at Groove Automotive?
I ran their inventory management for a long time. I moved up to their marketing department and just spent a lot of time in and around dealerships. And so I really liked the idea of it.
That sounds like an incredible opportunity for you, but it sounds like you had some bigger aspirations.
Being young, 20-something-year-old guys wanted to kind of do our own thing and, go against the corporate grain. And so we all sat down in August of 2014 and set up with Secretary of State. Didn't really know what we were doing, except that I had inside information on how dealerships work and things like that. And so over really the next year, we kind of figured out where we needed to go. It took about 6 months just to get licensing in Colorado as a new startup dealership.
Interesting. My first reaction would be, wow. But then I thought, well, 6 months dealing with the government isn't all that long. What was that process like? I
remember Alex, our other business partner, going to CIADA, which is the local independent dealer group association. And he had gone maybe 5 or 6 times to go meet with the lady to figure out all the paperwork and stuff. And at the last one, she said, okay, well, I think you've come and seen me enough. Now it's time to get started, because he just wanted to make sure everything was done just right, which is great. And that's exactly why we have Alex doing what he does.
Well, everyone needs an Alex on their team. That's for sure. So tell me a little bit more about the early days of Mobility of Denver.
We started selling trucks and vans out of a little 500 square foot office, called ourselves Colorado Fleet and Mobility. And we started with like $100 carsforsale.com website. Being in the automotive industry and kind of working a lot of leads and doing things around inventory and sales has been my big key piece of, operating the dealership here. And then Alex has really run our service department. He's kind of the person that can just fix anything that he looks at and figure out how it works. And then Leo has always been our buyer. He just has a good sense of what things should cost, even in crazy markets. Like when we were doing sales in COVID, we tried to not get part of this 19% increase in prices that a lot of dealerships and even, just the economy that was going through all that craziness. We tried to keep our prices pretty even keeled. And so that helped us a lot.
Yeah, that sounds like quite the competitive advantage, especially in face of early inflation, the supply chain issues, demand, and all the other craziness that was happening during that time.
We actually did really well during the pandemic because my background being in online sales and, having our marketing foothold in Denver, but also we sell quite a few vehicles out of state. So that's where kind of like Municipid and some of the stuff from surplus.com really jives with our company, because we are a national retailer online of used automobiles that happen to be wheelchair accessible.
Well, we certainly appreciate your business for sure over the many years. Leo was telling me how he bought an ambulance back in 2016, I believe, from Hennepin County in Minnesota. So, yeah, really appreciate your business over the years. So everyone really remembers their first sale in their business. I know ours at Municipid was a riding mower that a town was hoping to get $100 for, and they sold it for $500, and they were thrilled with it. So what was your first sale?
Our first major vehicle that we sold, besides just some smaller vans and stuff like that, was an ambulance. It was an AEV, McCoy Miller ambulance that a facility had. I think it might have even been a silent bid process that we brought it in and resold it to another facility in a totally different part of the country. So we kind of figured out that, like, if we know what something's worth and we can find an audience for it, there's money to be made.
Yeah, there's so many great opportunities out there to find deals kind of on one side of the country and demand on the other and bridge that gap. It's funny to me, the governments that we speak with that are looking at using us, they don't realize until they actually start using us how often people come across country to buy their items, and they're always surprised by that. Sometimes I'm surprised too, depending on what the item is, but it happens quite often. So there's definitely opportunity out there. So what came next in the evolution of Mobility of Denver?
In 2017, because at that point we were really getting into the mobility business for selling converted vehicles, we were approached by the manufacturer VMI, and VMI builds these conversion vehicles out of Arizona. They do a really good job. And so what they'll do is they'll take a brand new $50,000, $60,000 Toyota Sienna or Chrysler into their factory. They strip all the plastic, carpet, wiring out of it, and then they start slicing it up so that way they can put the lowered floor in there. And so we had always sold used vehicles up to that point, so we didn't think it was that big of a deal. But like when they took us out to the factory and they're in there, hundreds of guys at a time taking these vans apart and cutting them up, we're like, okay, well, this is serious. So we got signed up to be a local dealer for their product line. Part of that was with the agreement that we would have a full dealership set up. So that's the location that you came and saw us at. Basically, since 2018, we've just been doubling in sales every year because we've been able to now offer a full product line, from brand new vehicles that have conversions all the way down to the sub $20,000 vehicles that are 10 years old with over 100,000 miles. So it's been super cool to see families that wouldn't be able to afford from some of our competitors or, just a brand new, $80,000 plus vehicle to be able to get into the lower price vehicles. And that's a big thing. And I think it kind of goes along with the mantra of maybe what you guys stand for at Municipid, and even just the online ability to sell something to somebody in a market that they don't have a lot of options, and offer a product that meets different needs rather than just always the top price point. And even though we do still sell some of the, expensive vehicles, a lot of the people that are super grateful and like it changes their lives a lot are the lower priced vehicles that you can find on surplus.com or even Municipid and our website. And it's cool to see, Municipid, we really like the idea of a facility taking a vehicle, getting their use out of it, and then being able to repurpose that.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head with respect to making items available to a much larger audience of people, and giving them access to deals that they might not have had otherwise. And then, yes, the reuse aspect of these items that are won, in some cases used for completely different reasons than the original purpose of the item, which we always find fascinating and that we cover quite a bit here on this podcast. I'm curious how you got into the automotive business. What is your background? What kind of set you in this direction?
Yeah, so I guess I've always been around cars and working on cars. My dad was my mom called him a Renaissance man, right? He always had some kind of project he was working on, whether it be the house, his big family, or cars. I mean, growing up, we always had at least 3 or 4 cars sitting in the backyard that my dad had either been given from friends or picked up at an auction, or, just one of our daily cars crapped out. And so he just kept it in the back because he knew one day in his mind that he was going to fix it or work on it. So, I mean, at an early age, probably all the way back to maybe 5 years old, I remember sitting in a busted old car, literally, that was sitting in our yard, kind of like a little junkyard. But my dad was really into Volvos. And so we had like an old P1800 that he had in college. It was his second one. The P1800, I don't know if you know, but that's the 1,000,000-mile car that there's a gentleman that drives around and he's racked over 1,000,000 miles on that car. And so it just had kind of like that mystique. And so I've always had a good connection with cars.
Yeah, that's really cool to be able to take your experience from your dad and then turn it into a career. And then I also understand that your dad was super helpful throughout college.
So I got into college right after high school, went to the Art Institute of Colorado. That's actually where my dad was teaching at the time. And he taught, I think it was like 26 or 27 different courses over the course of his 13 years at the Art Institute. And I actually had the privilege of being able to take some classes with him. And one of his classes was transportation design. So he actually taught clay model sculpting. Being able to see that was really cool. I never was like the best artist. I did a lot of commercial design and things like that. And so towards the end of being in college, I kind of realized I was better suited for website design, more commercial applications for art rather than like fine art. Actually, my first job right out of graduating from college was at a wine cellars design company, because a lot of the people in my graduating class were like going and trying to interview, and it was very competitive at that time, pre-2008, to try to get a design job that was high paying. And so I just kind of I didn't spend a lot of time looking around for jobs, but I just kind of took the first one that was local. So there's a wine cellar company called Savante Wine Cellars. Daryl Hogeback, the owner over there, great guy, very passionate about woodworking and things like that. However, I quickly realized I wasn't as passionate about all that. And so that's when my gears were kind of starting to turn.
Well, next time I'm in Denver, we're going to have to head over to Savante. So what was next?
I took a job just as a salesperson at a Mazda dealership on Arapahoe Road here. And that's when I started in the car business. And it was just a friend of a friend knew the GM over there. And they always needed salespeople. So they just threw me in. I was, totally different person back then, very shy and not outgoing. And so being in the sales position for the first time, that was like a huge shock, I guess, cultural shock, but also like professional push to get in there. And so I can definitely attribute my more success of being kind of thrown into the fire there. But long story short, I went through a transition like immediately there. And so the people that I knew were kind of more old school car guys that had worked at the Burt Auto Group. Burt Auto Group had been in Colorado for like 40 or 50 years. And so then this new startup company called Groove Automotive with like hands on the steering wheel, kind of new age stuff, like took over pretty quickly after I started there. And so a lot of people that were more veterans in the car industry that kind of wanted to do stuff old school were leaving at the same time as this merger takeover was happening. And I stuck around. I was like, hey, this is interesting. Maybe I, could position myself. And that's how I actually moved up to the inventory management from just the lowly sales floor. Green pea is what they called you if you just started in the car business, to inventory management, because I always like to tell people I was smarter than the average car person on there, having my background in technical experience with websites and things like that. So I still to this day take the photographs of our vehicles on our website, and that came from 6 months in working at that dealership.
Well, I can certainly attest to the quality of photos based on the photos that you've uploaded to surplus.com and to Municipid. And so really appreciate that. And also in the line of work that you're in, I'm not sure there's a more important role of having great photos available to potential buyers.
Yeah, we know that a lot of times people are only going to be able to see our car just based on the photos, right? Because we do sell a lot of vehicles out of state, and even just the demographic of the folks that are buying our cars, may not be able to get to the dealership and actually inspect it themselves. And really, what are the sad things that happens that we really try to avoid, and hopefully that's like a good selling point of us, is we try to take a lot of photos of the cars. That way, when somebody gets something, if they haven't seen it in person, they're not surprised, right? So like that's the main thing. And obviously, probably something that you think about on your sites is just show everything, right? The good, bad, and the ugly. And one of the things that happens a lot of times in our industry is like if there's a ding or scratch or something on the roof, somebody will say, oh, it doesn't matter. Somebody in a wheelchair won't see that. Well, I know it's there and I don't feel good about that kind of thing. So we always try to make sure just if it's on there, it's photographed. And so you'll see that on our listings.
Yeah, you guys really do a great job with not only the photos, but the descriptions. And again, super helpful for your demographic when it comes to searching for these mobility vehicles online. I'm curious, when you kind of were making the transition from selling just regular vehicles and vans and ambulances or whatever to the mobility, what was sort of the drive behind that? What opportunity did you see, or what sort of is the genesis of that?
Whenever we would get a used wheelchair accessible vehicle in that wasn't $30,000, we were selling some of them in the early days $10,000, $15,000. I mean, we just had such a huge influx of leads of people being like, hey, I need this. I've been looking everywhere for something like this. And so we would sell these, inexpensive wheelchair accessible vehicles to people that had no other option. And so the lady that had flown out to buy the vehicle, I think we had the car listed for a day or two on eBay. She was like, hey, I'm coming out. Is the car still there? I'm buying tickets. And she flew out from Idaho, got a little Uber ride from the airport over to our office, which is about 20 minutes, saw the car, was like, yep, this is exactly what I need, paid for his cash on the spot, and then drove it all the way back home. And I think that kind of like goes back to like the idea of Municipid or some of these other sites is like, this lady had no other option in Idaho. She looked on eBay. She trusted that site, and she saw that, hey, we were selling it.
A lot of people don't realize how often people buy items cross-country on Municipid and now on surplus.com. And it happens all the time. We just had a recent podcast episode where a guy in Houston, Texas, drove up to north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to buy a used fire truck, kind of like a utility truck, and drove it back to Texas with his daughter. It was a really cool story. Those stories kind of happen all the time. And yeah, making these vehicles and equipment and other items available to a much wider audience than, in our case, a government or a small business might have access to generally. So Yeah, we hear stories all the time about that. So it's cool that you're also experiencing that. Obviously, you've impacted positively the lives of many people over the years. Do you have any stories that are exceptional or memorable with customers and how you sort of given back some freedom to them and autonomy?
Yeah, I mean, we just have so many stories about different folks that have been homebound, or they had kind of given up on wanting to be able to be more mobile, and now that they have the vehicle that they can get around, things like that. But I'll tell you too, one of them is we had just a very down and out veteran that his family life had been affected by sickness, and he just had lost his wife. And a lot of people don't realize, like, obviously when you're married and you've been married for a long time, that you just become very reliant on the person that you're with. And he had just felt horrible that he lost his wife, and so he kind of given up. So we were approached by his son, and his son just said, "Hey, my dad's in a bad place. We really need a wheelchair van. We can't use Accessoride. We have a lot of public transportation here, but it's all kind of done through Accessoride, which is through RTD system. And it's a really great program, and people are able to get to doctor's appointments and things like that. But there's just so many people that don't have the ability to purchase a mobility van. And so they are reliant on the public transportation system. There's like time is a factor on those. So like, you're on somebody else's time, you're waiting for a bus to show up. You'll get to the doctor's appointment, you'll get your hour there, and then you won't get picked up for like 5 or 6 hours because like the timing is bad for the pickup. So his son was just like, "Hey, I'm taking on the brunt of all this, and we really need some help." So we went through and we tried to figure out stuff. And this is in the earlier days. So I also, in addition to doing the marketing, run the finance department. But basically, there's certain lenders that will lend on mobility vans and certain ones that won't. And there's complications to all that. But anyways, this customer didn't, quote unquote, technically qualify for the VA grants to be able to get a conversion and a vehicle. He wasn't service connected, but he had, been a veteran and just had a lot of issues with all that sort of system. So he didn't get any assistance from the government with there, which is totally fine. A lot of people don't, but he just didn't make a good income. And so we went through like 5 or 6 different scenarios trying to figure everything out. We finally found the vehicle that would work for him. Finally figured out that he had a couple trade-ins. So then that way, because he had no money. So we had to figure out how we're going to show a down payment, because a lot of lenders are like, "Hey, you got to at least show 10% down or something." So we finally found the lender, found the car, had a couple trade-ins, and he was north of Denver, of course, almost an hour away from us. And this is earlier days, probably 17 or 18. We had all this kind of stuff going on, and the son was just like, "Hey, we can't get down there to finalize the deal. We got to be able to have you come up." So I was like, "Okay, no problem. We'll figure it out." One of the cars that he had as a trade-in was his daily driver, Ford Expedition 04. Great car, just old. And then his other car was actually his son's car, and the son, we had coerced him into trading it in. He was like, "Oh, I don't think you'll give me anything for it." We gave him $500 for his non-running Ford Explorer that had a blown tranny or something like that. But he said it kind of moves. And so we had like confirmed, "Hey, are we going to be able to drive these cars back if we take your car up there?" So Leo and I jumped in his car that he was buying, got all the paperwork, all the ducks in the row. And this is a subprime deal too. So, there was 25 pages he had to sign. We had to get stipulations. It was just a whole big thing. But anyways, it was a lot of work. Got up there. Customer just starts crying, right? Like, he's like, "This is exactly what this is over like a couple months span too. Like, so he didn't even know that this is going to be able to go through. And like, just seeing his face like made the day worth it because getting home was a whole nother story. In that one of the cars worked, the other one sort of worked. And so we're like, "Screw it. Let's just go. We'll make it back." And so, long story short, Leo broke down on the side of the road in the Explorer. We had to take the other car, go get a tow strap from Walmart. Anyways, we got it home like 6 hours later.
Well, that's an incredible story. I love hearing those stories like that. And I'm sure he was thrilled that you were able to make it happen for him. Switching gears, no pun intended. I imagine a lot has changed in the last 20 years or so, especially with technology, autonomous vehicles. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on AI and autonomous vehicles and how it relates to the mobility industry.
As far as autonomous driving goes, so a lot of what people think of autonomous driving is advanced cruise control is kind of available in a lot of vehicles right now. Autonomous driving is like 10 steps to where, like, if you could actually just have your car drive itself. And we're only, I think, in like step 2 or 3 of most cars. Tesla is obviously the most advanced. I think some of the stuff that Mercedes is coming out with is going to be the next evolution and ability to just have the car do things itself. But yeah, it does help a lot. So like a lot of the Toyotas we sell have that advanced cruise control where it can follow cars, can reduce the amount of time that a driver that's in a wheelchair is having their hands be fatigued by having to press the gas pedal on long trips through the hand control devices and things like that. So that does help. But yeah, true autonomous driving you probably won't see in wheelchair accessible vehicles a few years after it comes out to the mainstream. So we're always a couple years behind just because it takes the engineers at the conversion manufacturing and even the manufacturing facilities that produce the adaptive equipment like hand controls a couple years to catch up.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of the big debate is how long this is going to take till we get to, full self-driving, real autonomous driving where we don't even need the steering wheel. So yeah, we'll see. So from your business standpoint, how do you look toward future growth, I guess, within Colorado and outside of Colorado? And what does the competitive landscape look like?
So for our business in particular, what we've done kind of from day one, and I think I've touched upon it a little bit, but basically, the 3 of us that started the company, and now there's 9 of us that come into work every day and full-time employees, we have just slowly grown, and we have taken everything a step at a time just to make sure that quality doesn't get sacrificed for quantity, right? And we don't obviously want to be perfectionists on everything, but if we can get the basics down right and produce a service for our customer base consistently and slowly grow that over time, I mean, that's exactly what we've done over the last 8 or 9 years since we've been increasing sales so much. And we've been approached by different places, different thought processes of, hey, let's just replicate what you have here and put it across multiple states or multiple stores and things like that. And so we're kind of always have that in our back of our mind that we'd like to expand to other stores. We've seen it done successfully at some other mom and pop shops that then became more regional suppliers for the vehicles. A lot of what we have in Colorado is interesting because we're in a little bit of an oasis for mobility dealers in that there's several of us here in the Colorado metropolitan area that service a huge section of the Midwest. And there's like states like Montana that doesn't have really any mobility dealers. And so we sell quite a few vehicles out there because people can buy online and we explain things and kind of give them support even after the sale. We're able to, ship out parts and kind of work with their local mechanics to kind of help if there's an issue that comes up. Arizona.
So are they picking up the vehicles or are they having them shipped? What's the typical scenario when people are buying out of state?
Yeah, it's about 50-50. So we do have a lot of people that'll fly in, check out a vehicle, and then drive it back. And then, there's an equal or maybe even sometimes, depending on the pandemic climate, more frequent is that people just have us set up transportation for them. Colorado is nice. We're actually luckily in the middle of the country. And so we're a really good transportation depot, you might call us, for a lot of truckers coming in and out. So a lot of what people do when they buy something, and maybe some of your customers on Municipid, is they'll buy something and then they're like, okay, now I got to figure out shipping. A lot of mobility customers, the conversation of, hey, is this the right vehicle for me, at the same time, they're talking about, well, how am I going to get this to me?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the last thing anyone wants to try to deal with is finding a shipping company after all they've gone through or that they've been through. So along with helping them with getting the vehicles shipped to them, I'm assuming you're also kind of holding their hand with respect to financing, dealing with insurance and that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that and how insurance works and what it covers or what it doesn't, and how people are paying for these vehicles?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we're kind of juggling like 4 or 5 topics with the customer whenever they call in, right? Does the vehicle fit their needs? Does it fit their budget? Can we get them financed? How are we going to get it to them? And then, yeah, a lot of people do ask about insurance. So insurance industry on mobility vans is kind of what a lot of companies consider a gray area, right? So you have an insurance company that is insuring the car, and then you have a conversion that oftentimes can cost as much as the car that's added to the vehicle that insurance has to calculate residual values on, for total loss scenarios and things like that. So it can definitely be a complicated piece of it. One of the things that we always talk about here is, hey, we should, kind of like some of the big dealers do, is have an insurance broker on site, so that way we can get somebody set up with the right coverage. We have had a couple issues with customers in the past that their insurance company didn't put the correct policy in place for their mobility vehicle, and so that's kind of been a learning curve for everybody. But now if somebody is in our office or even talking on the phone about insurance, we definitely recommend that they tell their insurance company that they're buying a mobility vehicle. And if the insurance broker or agent doesn't know what that means, just tell them to get their manager, and then that they want a mobility rider added to the policy. So that's really just an additional piece of insurance that covers all the mobility equipment. And you just give them the invoice of what you paid at our dealership today. And then that shows them how to properly account for that. So like, God forbid, somebody drives out off the lot and they've got everything set up correctly and they get it, sideswiped and totaled out. They're not fighting the insurance to say, oh, well, we have to prove that this was a mobility vehicle, and it was just set up correctly at the front end. And obviously the cost is going to be a little bit more because you're buying a more expensive vehicle in their eyes, right? When the biggest problem nowadays is it's a good and a bad problem is you have a lot of VIN to code software. So as soon as you call in and tell the insurance company, hey, this is what I'm buying, here's the VIN number, they're like, oh, perfect. Yeah, this is a $30,000 Toyota Sienna. Well, hold on a second. I'm actually paying $65,000 for it because of all the adaptive equipment and things like that. It's not just a plug and play system. The mobility conversion manufacturers are working on being able to add that to the VIN, because a lot of times the Braun or VMI will buy a specific mobility package, quote unquote, from the conversion or from the chassis manufacturer, Toyota, for example. And so we know, hey, that's probably a mobility van. But really, there's no way in the VIN to tell that it's a conversion vehicle unless you call the conversion manufacturer and verify their build.
Yeah. That's really interesting. How does medical insurance come into play? Are these vehicles covered at all by medical insurance in the event of, sort of a catastrophic situation for the person?
Yeah, great question. We get that one a lot too. So your regular health insurance isn't going to cover a mobility vehicle. Say you developed a chronic illness where it puts you in a wheelchair. There's other insurance pieces, specifically like workers' comp. Like if you're injured on the job and the company that you were working for had workers' comp insurance, then workers' comp is going to be able to kick in and say, hey, this person is now wheelchair bound. They have to be able to access their vehicle and access their lives and things like that. So we do work with workers' comp through, a lot of it is through Craig Hospital, which is a spinal cord rehabilitation center, one of the best in the country. They're only about 8 minutes from our dealership here in Denver. And so that's mostly where that's kind of come from. There are other like funding sources, I would call it, where it uses, or each one is slightly different. A lot of the money that's out there to help with these type of conversions comes from grant resources that use states allocated money for, adolescents that have cerebral palsy or, are just wheelchair bound for whatever reason or another. And so a lot of states have what's called waiver programs. So if your child is on a waiver program, which it takes quite a bit of doing, there's like 100-page form in Colorado to fill out and go through all the application and everything. You can get some assistance there. The idea is it's from the old way of thinking, but basically that a person will adapt their van to make sure that it is wheelchair accessible. And so that money really oftentimes is about $10,000 for the assistance in making their vehicle wheelchair accessible. That comes from the older days, 1990s, early 2000s, where a family would have an Econoline van randomly, and then we could put a lift in it and kind of do a $10,000 or less conversion. Now, fast forward, these Toyota Sienna hybrid all-wheel drive conversions are $45,000 just for the conversion. So it's kind of an antiquated system, but yes, there is assistance out there for that people that need it. One of the big things too that Colorado does really well is we have Division of Vocational Rehab, and they use the state's money to be able to help people get back to work. And so if you're injured or you develop an issue where you are wheelchair bound and obviously you need to get to work, you need a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So we've seen a lot of great cases where the state has stepped up and said, hey, we're going to cover the cost of the conversion and the adaptive equipment. The customer just has to pay for the chassis of the vehicle that is going to then get modified. And so that's worked really well. But it's not like an insurance base. It's through, government funding kind of.
Sure. It's good that that's available because, again, someone that's going through a devastating injury that requires them to have a wheelchair accessible van, it's kind of one of the last things they're going to want to have to think about is, wow, how am I going to afford this? Or, what are the options? So it's nice that you're familiar and that can kind of help them or guide them along with available options to help finance this.
Yeah, totally. That's the rewarding stuff. Mm-hmm.
So, you're a young guy and you started, this business at a relatively young age. Do you have any advice that you would give other young entrepreneurs looking to make a difference in the mobility and accessibility industry?
Yeah, we didn't realize it, but it's a tough business once you get in it. There's a lot of cutthroat people, but there's a lot of great people as well. I think it probably mimics a lot of different industries that you can get into. The car business is closely tied to mobility industry for wheelchair accessible vehicles just by default, because that's what we are really as car dealers. And so if anybody has interest in it, yeah, go work for a car dealership. The sales team is always revolving at those dealerships and always needing, new perspectives and things like that. The car business in general, when I was working at a regular car dealership, people would always talk about in management how the car business is 20 years behind everybody else. Like the medical industry or technology is so far advanced in how we have systems and CRMs in place, and the car business is so behind. Well, then we got into the mobility industry, and it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe everybody here is like 30 years behind because we're doing stuff that the old car dealers used to do. So every industry always benefits from new, fresh perspectives. I think I touched on it a little bit. I taught at the Art Institute of Colorado. Art Institute of Colorado for a couple years as a professor. And it was so crazy seeing the reverse of me being the student versus me being on the other side of the desk and seeing the fresh perspectives of people, young people that are just learning things for the first time and don't have a point of reference, and how, everybody connects the dots differently, but also kind of in the same way. And it's just cool to see how things, I'm sure you've experienced it in many different industries. There's like the old standard way to do things, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right, but it's the old tried and true way. And so when you take certain pieces out of an equation out and you move it around, like it's a totally different thing. And that happens a lot. I read something a long time ago that the key indicator of a entrepreneur is that you're never satisfied working for somebody else, right? And so that presents itself in different ways, whether it be pushing back on, management and bosses and trying to do things and, keep getting held down by the man kind of thing. And so when we first started the business, it was great. I could do whatever I wanted, right? I had freedom to really choose any path that we wanted to go through, what we wanted to focus on, what we wanted to spend our money on. And back in those days, I mean, we were on a shoestring budget, right?
Sure.
Each of us partners started with $50,000 that we scraped and scrimped and borrowed and pleaded, and begged to get pulled together. So starting a business at $150,000 when your main business is to carry inventory, which
Right.
our average selling price of a car is now $50,000, and we have 79 of them in our system right now that we're working on or for sale. I mean, that's just a huge difference in where we had to scale. So it doesn't mean that when you're an entrepreneur, you truly can do anything, because if you make the wrong mistakes, right, you're going to go out of business, or you're going to piss a customer off, or it's just going to be not a good thing. So we really used our experiences in our different industries that we had professionally worked in, but we always just took feedback and tried to implement it as fast as possible. And that really separates, I think, a young, cocky business startup versus like a seasoned, successful business person is, just because you can do whatever you want in your business doesn't mean that the market is going to accept that. And so you really just have to take feedback as fast as possible and implement things that are going to safeguard your business, so that way you don't get in trouble or you get into a scenario where it's going to start losing you money, but also that it's beneficial to the customer. I always tell people whenever they say, well, how have you guys been successful? It's literally, you gotta, especially in this industry, when your customer might have been passed around from other businesses or corporations, or, they're dealing with, we have customers all the time in our showroom that their insurance is denying their need for certain medications and stuff like that. They're just used to, our customers are used to being told no and kind of being pushed around. So whenever we have a customer in front of us, it's like, hey, you're my best friend. I'm not going to leave you until we get everything that you want to get done accomplished, right? So it's a lot different than car sales in that it's such a numbers game over at a regular car lot. In that in this industry, you just really have to take everyone step by step, one at a time. There's so many aspects to business, I think, in general, and then each industry will have its own particulars. And so you really just have to study whatever industry you want to go into, hone your craft, and then take that leap of faith.
Sure. Do you have any moments of adversity over the years, as we all do? I'm sure you have a story.
One of the first early issues that we had in our business was, even though we went through all the steps, we followed all the guidelines from CIADA, which is the dealer assistance group. We followed the Colorado Dealers Association board. We thought we had every T crossed and I dotted. And about 3 or 4 months into us fully opening up our first location, the auto brokerage in Aurora, City of Aurora shut us down and said, oh, by the way, you don't have a license to do business in Aurora.
Oh, geez.
We're going, oh, okay, well, that would have been good to know. So it took me and Leo sitting down with the city planner and saying, okay, well, what does that mean? And they wanted to tell us that the building we were in wasn't zoned for automotive, but then there was a broker in the same building. And so there's all these legalese to figure out. It ended up working itself out, but I mean, that's a scary thing. And you kind of step back and say, okay, well, if it's this difficult and we're being told no so many times, do we focus on something else? So it's that grit and resolve. I think there was a TED Talk a little while ago about grit and what that really means. It's that resolve and the courage to do it.
Well, Justin, this has been really awesome. Again, it was really, really cool to come out and hang out with you guys for a little while and learn a lot more about the mobility industry. It's been super helpful for me. And I really appreciate your time here on the Municipal podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. It's always great to hear from people that are in totally different sectors, but also there's a lot of things that are so similar, and just good reassurance that we're out there, we're making making people happy and just doing what we love. So always good to share with you, and really look forward to the success for your websites and all that, and look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Municipid podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the world of government surplus, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.